Welcome everybody. This is a new webinar from GigaOm Analysis of Real-World Hyperconvergence, and I am Enrico Signoretti, your host. This webinar is sponsored by Scale Computing, and as the title says, today we will talk about a real use case of hyperconvergence. So we will go through the entire story from the very beginning, before hyperconvergence adoption, with the customers that worked on all its journey to the end to get the hyperconverged infrastructure working, and a few years of experience on it. And he will tell us a lot of things about this journey. So joining me today Craig Theriac, Director of Product Management at Scale Computing, Robert MacCara, System Administrator at Maritime Paper. Good morning, guys. How are you today?
Good morning, Enrico.
Well, how are you?
Great to be here.
So, as I said, just a quick roundup of introduction. I'm Enrico Signoretti, GigaOm Research Analyst for Data Storage and Infrastructure. Greg, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I'm Craig Theriac. I'm the Director of Product Management at Scale. I've been with Scale since, it's been almost 10 years now. So a lot of us think of Scale as a startup. Having been here for 10 years, I've kind of been through the beginnings of HCI when there wasn't even a term for what it is that we're doing today, and kind of all the way back through the time when Scale had a unified storage product when we were providing SIFs, NFS, and iSCSI for small and medium-sized businesses. So kind of been here through a near decade now.
Yeah, that in the IT industry is a lot. I mean, and Robert, what about you?
Hi. Yeah, I've been in the IT fields, I guess, since punch card days. So I've seen a few changes since then. I'm working at a paper company now. We make boxes, and we've seen a lot of changes in the IT infrastructure here since I've been here about 11, 12 years now. So it's been an interesting ride all these years.
Fantastic. Yes, and without any further ado, just go through the agenda a little bit, and then we will try to make this section very, very interactive. So to all our listeners, if you have questions, don't hesitate, ask them directly on the chat window that you find on the right of your screen on the GoToWebinar panel. So we will get these questions if they are relevant for the discussion that we are in. So we will answer them directly or at the end of this session. So we will talk a little bit, as I said already, we'll talk a little bit about the entire journey. So the previous infrastructure, the pain points of that infrastructure, all the evaluation process, what happened when the customer decided for HCI, and then all the installation and first steps of this new infrastructure, and everything that happened after that. I mean, maintenance, expansions, rolling upgrades, or disruptive upgrades, if any, and everything else. And at the end, we will have a couple of additional section. One in what works and what doesn't. So we would like to understand better, from a real end user, from Robert, what he liked, and what is wishful thinking for the futures. And also we will touch also on the edge and hybrid cloud, which is a very, very common topic in many discussion about hyperconvergence today. So as I said, we will close with a question and answers, but actually, again, if you have any question, just don't be shy and chime in. So Here you go. Maybe before starting with what was available in your organization, Robert, before the advent of HCI, you want to give us a little bit of information about your company, what you do, what is your role in the company today, how it evolved. So just to give a little bit of background to our listeners.
Sure. So we are a corrugated converting and folding company. We have 4 locations in the Atlantic region of Canada. So we make boxes of all types and sizes. It's an extremely fast-moving business, and obviously the computer side of it, the server side, plays an important role in it.
Is your manufacturing processes are in these servers, in this infrastructure? I mean, how do you use your infrastructure?
So it's a SQL-based infrastructure, and we have our ERP system. It's made for the corrugated industry, so it's not something that you would see in any other type of manufacturing business, which presents its own challenges. And so we do our best with what we have, and try and keep up with the changes as they're thrown at us.
And what happens if the if your ERP system stops? I mean, does it impact your production, or do you have some time to react, or
Yeah, we have, if our system goes down, we're generally good for 3 or 4 hours, and after that we have to revert to paper and pencil to let the machines know what kind of boxes they're going to be running, and it's not a pretty sight when we lose our servers. So we do our best to keep uptime all the time, but it is possible to run, without computers. It's just very, very time consuming. And once you're used to using a computer and having everything on a touch screen, whatever, it's pretty hard to go back the old way. As time keeps moving, the older people that have been around for 25, 30, 40 years, as they disappear, so does that knowledge of how to do things by hand. So the reliance really is on making sure the computer systems stay up and running.
Yeah, and you told 3-4 hours, which is less than a single work shift. So it's very, for a manufacturing company anyway, it's a very, very short time. I mean, you can't lose your compute for that much. So this is an interesting thing. Also, how large is your organization? Just to have an idea on and what kind of revenues this organization has.
We're in the 100 million plus range. Like I said, we have 4 locations. Our main one is about 800,000 square feet and about 250 employees. There's 3 of us on the IT team, so I'm the system administrator. We have a manager and then a system analyst that works mostly with the ERP software.
Well, so you have a medium-sized company, at least for the European standards, with a very good revenue and a 3-people team. I mean, not huge, but actually, I guess you have to manage also not just the core infrastructure, but other components in your infrastructure. I mean, networking, especially between sites. So that there are a lot of work to do for your team.
Yeah, and I look after mostly the servers, the networking, desktop, laptops, the user experience, and that's between 4 plants. So there's a bit of travel involved. Most stuff can be done remotely, but it certainly keeps me busy.
yeah, I guess that it's very, very demanding. What so let's then move to the previous infrastructure. So what did you have before hyperconvergence?
When I first started here, we had big old servers on wheels. Think, like 2 cubic foot size servers, hot, big monsters things. They were old when I got here, and one of the first things I put into play was to upgrade the servers. So we went with VMware at the time, and so new servers, VMware Enterprise, and that was VMware was new to me at the time, so there was a quite a big learning curve for me there. I guess about after 5 years of moving along with VMware, it was time to replace lifecycle those servers, and that's when I started looking into the options, and Scale was right at the top of the list for replacements. And once we went to Scale, it was the rest was just history. It was a good move for the company and a great move for me because it made my workload so much simpler.
So you moved from physical to virtual first, and then from virtual to hyperconvergence. Okay, so your software, you manage. You told me that you have this internal analyst, so you have a full control of your custom application at the end, right?
Yes.
So it
yes.
was easy to migrate from physical to virtual.
Oh, now
relatively easy.
Maybe I better point out that the third member of our team, the analyst, is brand new, just a couple of months ago. So before that, it was just 2 of us.
Okay.
The migration and all that was all on me. I didn't really have any help with it. Moving from VMware to Scale really didn't take any great knowledge to do that. A trained monkey could have done that. Going from the old servers to VMware was much more difficult.
Yes, in fact, so maybe we can talk a little bit of the pain points that you had at that time. I mean, not that we want to talk about VMware in particular, but what was the pain point of a virtualized infrastructure? Okay, so the infrastructure that you had before scale computing and hyperconvergence. So you had servers and a shared storage infrastructure, I guess. So what was the problem with that kind of infrastructure?
The pain points were mostly, it was new to me at the time. I had just briefly worked with VMware prior to that, and it was really the learning curve, getting to the point where I was comfortable migrating the physical servers into VMware. I hate to dredge up the past, but it wasn't a pretty sight some days. It was a lot of work, and I learned a lot. So on the bright, there's always a plus. But I'm just as happy now that I think I just have one more VMware system at one of our remote plants. But I was happy to get into hyperconvergence. It just made things so much simpler and less work for me on a sort of a day-to-day basis. So yeah.
No, I was curious about the Craig point of view. I mean, we talked many times in the last few months about hyperconvergence, but we never talk in this series of webinars about the migration process that Scale enables somehow. I mean. So moving from a virtualized infrastructure, actually I have two questions. One is, do you find more customer moving from a different type of virtualized infrastructure to hyperconvergence, or do you see also customer moving from a type of hyperconvergence to your hyperconvergence? And I want to remember here to our attendees that Scale has a little bit of a different approach. So they manage the entire stack from the hardware up to the virtual machine. Not the operating system, of course, but all the the software, all the hypervisor. It's a full stack under management of Scale Computing.
Yeah, so that's a common question actually we hear from people that are looking to come from this is how do I get from my current solution to HC3? I will say, most of the time, it's funny, Robert, when you were answering the question of what pain points you had, 85%, actually looking at survey results of about 550 people out on Tech Validate, 85% of our customers are basically looking for a new solution because their current infrastructure is aging. It's at the end of their useful life. Primarily, I'd say close to that same number, 85% or so, are coming from either VMware or Hyper-V, and they've got a handful of host servers, maybe 3 or 4, sometimes 2, running running VMware or Hyper-V, and then that's usually connected down into either a SAN or a NAS. And it's usually that SAN or NAS that's coming up on the end of its useful life that triggers I need to start looking at something else. They've heard about it, hyperconvergence, don't quite know what it is. Actually, that's starting to change now. We're starting to see that more people have heard of it and are just trying to figure out how they can make the leap. The migration process, there are a whole bunch of tools you can use. It's probably good to point out, as you said, we own the entire stack. The hypervisor that we use is KVM based. So there is a migration that has to happen from either a physical environment, and that 15% that I'd say are running physical today, or probably even less to be honest, or coming from Hyper-V or VMware, you have to migrate that workload onto HC3. We see a lot of customers that will just use their existing backup program, and they'll do a bare metal restore into a VM running on HC3 from a backup. We also have a lot of, you can actually export a VMDK, and there's a process you can run through to import that as a QCOW2 format HC3 VM to bring that in. But most of all, we have customers use what's called HC3 Move, and that process, it's actually a product that we have licensed from a company called Carbonite. Actually, I think they were just acquired OpenText. And HC3 Move allows customers to, with very minimal downtime, they kind of set this up within the virtual machine that they're moving from, whether it's VMware, Hyper-V, or actually it can even be a physical workload. They create a target VM on HC3, and it will replicate byte by byte by byte. And once everything is replicated and everything's in sync, it will stay in sync until you say cut over. And so that cutover process, whether you say immediately or you schedule it for after hours, whenever the cutover process makes sense for your business or your organization, you'll hit cutover. It then shuts down the primary site virtual machine, and then we'll spin up the virtual machine on HC3 and do whatever registry changes it needs to make that new VM on HC3 look exactly like the VM that it was coming from, or VM or physical workload, I should say. And that process usually takes, 10 to maybe an hour if there's a whole lot of registry changes that need to happen. So that's the minimized downtime that happens when you're using HC3 Move. And we see a widespread of people using all three of those.
But it also is interesting. Oh, sorry. Yeah, but it's also interesting to note that you have a varied varied kind of people interested in your solution. I mean, you mentioned that both people with aging virtualized infrastructure, but also actual hyperconvergence users that want something even simpler.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And we also see the kind of I don't want to call them laggards because that sounds it sounds accusatory almost, but the people that just never actually made the jump to virtualization in the first place, they're still running physical workloads out there, one operating system to one server. without high availability or anything like that built in, and they've just never been able to make the leap as a company, mainly because of the complexity that existed in that 3-2-1 architecture that I described earlier.
Yeah. So very good. Let's see. We have our first poll for this webinar. So what are the pain points of your on-premises infrastructure? Okay, and complexity, total cost of ownership, flexibility, ease of use and manageability, and I don't have any problem yet. So please answer this poll, which we will share the results immediately after this this very quick round of questions. The poll is online. Okay, you're quick. Somebody already answered. A few more seconds. And so at the end of the day, Robert, what was your major pain point when you moved from your virtualized infrastructure to HCI?
The reason, I guess, the motivation to move was our old hosts. We had 3 hosts in those days. They were all end of life. Our SAN was end of life, and we couldn't even renew support on it in any way. And our VMware Enterprise licensing was also up for renewal. Our backup software was up for renewal as well, but that's a different story. And so, so we sort of, that was a driving point to get away from the virtualization. And the other reason was I was the one looking after it on my own, and my coworker knew nothing about it whatsoever. And so it was up to me to fix it whenever. And of course, the exact opposite now is true with VMware. Anybody can create a new server or do anything with it. It is that simple. You don't need a course. You don't need any training. It's night and day different.
Okay, so ease of use and manageability maybe was at the end, including the difficulties to manage different types of upgrade and licensing. You
Right.
say. Okay, so unfortunately the results are not showing up, but I can say you that total cost of ownership is 27%, flexibility 18%, ease of use and manageability 27%, complexity only 9%, and I don't have problems 18%. Very good. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I would like to be in this position, but I think it's interesting that the majority is in ease of use and total cost of ownership. So maybe quite similar to what you found, Robert. And so let's go on the next slide, and let's talk a little bit about the evaluation process. We already mentioned that you were in a moment of transition. I mean, you got this all this licensing, support that were handing, some servers that were on hold, and a few other things going concurrently. So you had to choose a different infrastructure, a new infrastructure. And how did you start the evaluation process? I mean, did you start evaluating standard solutions again? Did you already know about hyperconvergence? What were the vendors that you evaluated at the time? And just to give another information to our listeners, we are talking about 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Correct. We're a Dell shop primarily, and so I was looking at Dell's offering, and on Spiceworks I heard about scale computing, and putting the two side by side, they're not the same. They are different. The Dell system and scale. The scale was just a better choice for us. So we didn't really, it was just mostly just research. I didn't demo anything or trial anything. I didn't know anyone else that had a system that had scale, so I wasn't able to go look at it. But I looked at some demos online and talked to the scale people, and I was hooked. And so obviously this is what we ended up with. And so the evaluation process was pretty bare. And that many years ago, there wasn't a lot of choices out there. So it was pretty well down to, this looks good, this is going to suit me and my environment. And like I said, we were very, very pleased that we ended up with scale.
Can I ask you a question around, moving from VMware to a different kind of environment? I mean, wasn't it scary? Did you test it before doing any migration? How did you choose about a totally different stack?
If I recall, I did set up some servers from scratch in scale, which is literally a 2-second process. And the servers that we had that I wanted to migrate, I think back in those days we used double take. The last set that I migrated, say last year, I think we used the move that Craig was talking about, and that worked just great as well. So it was really just, okay, this is what we have now. Let's get the old stuff onto the new, and didn't mess around. We just dove in and did it. And maybe it was luck, or maybe it was by design, but we didn't have any issues whatsoever in moving from VMware into scale.
And when you tested, you told that you saw a few demos. Okay, so the user interface was totally different. How did you manage that? I mean, was it okay? I know that scale computing is very easy to use, and there is a demo somewhere on the internet of a little kid creating a virtual machine in a few minutes. But anyway, you at that time you were proficient with VMware. You spent some times around it. So did you have any issue with that?
No, it was a nice surprise, because now we didn't have to worry about virtual switches or any of the things that you would typically have to use setting up a VMware environment. And I was at a luncheon once where Scale was being demoed, and they got one of the servers who knew nothing about computers, and she was able to figure out and set up the server in like 30 seconds. And that's someone that isn't in IT, doesn't know anything about servers or whatever, but it's just that intuitive. And it just takes any of the guesswork or any of the options or choices that you would have to make in Hyper-V or VMware. It just gets rid of all those. And it's a simple process to use the scale console. I can't stress enough how easy it is to use without any knowledge whatsoever.
So at the end, the process was very, very straightforward. I mean, you did a little bit of research on the internet, and then you found the solution was easy to use, easy to implement, at least at that time on paper. You got a couple of demos, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, coming from another virtualization platform, you already have all the concepts, so the transition is not that bad.
No,
actually, it was good, actually, from your point.
Yeah, the transition was very, very easy. Just any of the questions that you would have had to map out ahead of time in Hyper-V or VMware are just not there with scale. It's not needed, not required, and you let the system worry about how it does everything.
So, and Craig, what is the reaction when you do these demos from your website, or I don't know how you organize these things with your prospects. So, do you find these potential customers having a similar reaction, or you know, is there something else
Yeah.
from these guys?
No, that I would say the demo, so owning product management, product marketing actually rolls up through me as well. And one of the things we look at is what is it in the sales process that allows somebody like Robert that made it all the way through to advance from stage to stage as they're kind of evaluating what it is that they want. And every single one of the customers that made it through has seen a demo. I mean, that's kind of a big part of the sales process, to the point where we have an entire deck that we've put together that we can walk people through. Most of our sales reps will do 2 slides and we go straight into a demonstration of the product, because the product itself really speaks to the simplicity that we're trying to make sure that prospects understand that it really is as simple as we're saying. And we try to spend the entire, sometimes half hour to an hour with those prospects to demonstrate whatever it is that they need to see within the product to know that coming from VMware, that same functionality exists, but now it's less complex. So the demo is critical to that. We have a lot of customers that also, you mentioned some of the videos online, in addition to seeing the live demonstration of one of our sales engineers, or possibly the weekly demonstration that we put on where somebody will sign up for a webinar and come view the demonstration there. We have a bunch of pre-recorded ones, including things like the Tech Field Day events, where we will pre-record. We will actually, during the live presentation, record a demonstration and go into a lot of detail, and then that video is sitting out there online. I'm astounded by the number of people that go through the depths of YouTube and every other Vimeo, or every other site out there to see every video that they can. And what they're really looking for is trying to find what that flaw is, because they'll see the demo and you'll hear customers say, "What am I missing? What is it that you're not providing that I'm not thinking to ask?" And it's luckily we've got great customers like Robert and others that are willing to tell their story, to tell everybody, look, you're not missing anything. Everything you see is exactly what it is. The transparency is there. It really is this simple. And the demo is a key part of that whole message.
So
Okay.
it really is too good to be true. It is as good as it is as good as it's presented. There's nothing hidden. There's no gotchas. It just works.
Well, this is somehow refreshing, because it's not always that simple. I mean, many solutions in the IT, everybody looks for simplicity now, but actually it's very tough to find something that is very simple to implement, use, and and so we're at the end already talking about why HCI. I don't know even if this slide needs some more time. I mean, you, Robert, choose HCI, so Hyperconvergence, for simplicity, right? And also, I don't know if you choose scale computing for a particular reason compared to other HCI in the market, or in the previous poll, we had the total cost of ownership of the traditional infrastructure and ease of use. So maybe having everything consolidated was also a better choice from the cost point of view.
When the cost was a factor, because at the point when we migrated, everything was up for renewal, end of life, whatever, and so we didn't have VMware licensing anymore, and we were an enterprise customer, so that was fairly expensive. We would have needed a new SAN, new hosts, and when I did it all out in a spreadsheet, we were saving money by going with scale. And now I haven't looked, Craig could speak better to this than I could, but back then there was no comparison. We saved money, and so obviously the bottom line in a privately owned business is what it costs to run the business, and so we saved money, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, Craig, I could ask you why scale computing helps to save money, but I'm scared about the the answer here because you are the vendor, so you probably have all the bias.
Don't. Oh, I have all the bias. Don't ask me. I can tell you that I will say what we typically will do as part of the sales process is after you've seen the demo and you feel like this is the right solution for you, we will we use a tool that allows us to aggregate all the the IOPS and the CPU requirements of your existing environment to help make a recommendation of a solution. Usually the final step after we've said here's kind of a good, better, best option for you that will satisfy your requirements today plus the growth we factored in the discussion with the end user. We will usually do a total cost of ownership analysis, and it's usually versus that 3-2-1 environment running VMware and running a SAN or NAS. And in that, it really is a populated by the end user or the prospect to say, tell me how much are you paying for licensing, how much are you paying for the SAN, and we'll kind of walk through the calculation. Mainly because after you've seen the demo and as a system administrator or as a director of IT of an organization that kind of fits into our wheelhouse, you're sold on the concept of it. Now you actually have to go tell that message internally, and so this tool allows us to kind of justify the purchase so that you can go internally to say, all right, check writers, this is why we're making this make this decision the way we are. Again, I am biased, so don't listen to me. But yeah, listen to all the customers out there that have purchased that kind of have done that analysis on their own.
Okay, very good. And so let's go to day one. So when Scale shipped the boxes with these new servers, because physically they are servers, they are just stacked together and to build this hyperconvergence infrastructure. And you, Robert, had to do the first initial deployment. So there are several questions. Okay, how much time did you spend to plan about this installation? How much did it take to do the first installation without any operating system, any VM in it yet? And then how much did it take to migrate everything? And of course, testing and make sure that everything was up and running correctly.
So when you get the boxes, first thing you notice is you get a free screwdriver, which is a great bonus. You just rack them, and I already had I had my rack ready to go. Put the servers in, plug them in. There's a few commands you run to start the setup and to tell it that it's a stack, and maybe an hour or so it takes to get your initial node up and running. And we've already gone over how quickly you can set up a server on it, so you can be up and running in an extremely short amount of time. I have to give a shout out to the Scale support team. They're amazing. Anytime I've had to call, I've had an answer right away, and they can go in the back end and check things out for you. And in the your initial installation, it's very painless. It's the same as essentially all you're doing is you're putting them in your rack, typing a few commands in the console, and then it's done.
I see. So it was very, very quick.
Very simple and quick.
Very good. And so what happened immediately after? I mean, oh, sorry. Before going to the next poll, I was curious to know. So we are already talking about the migration process, and it was a few years back. So you didn't have the new tools that are available now. Okay, did you need to do something particular to move the machines from the old VMware infrastructure to the new HCI environment?
Yes, there was a conversion process. We used Double Take software to bundle up the old server and put it into Scale. And I'm thinking that process was fairly similar to the way the Carbonite move is today. It was just a little bit different. It was different software, but the process was the same. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be able to do it. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay, so it was simple also to migrate machines and stuff.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, very good. So what happened? Sorry. So we have another poll, and this time, are you evaluating hyperconvergence for your next infrastructure? And the answers are, it's in my radar, but it's too early to tell. I'm strongly considering this option. I prefer traditional solutions. I mean, the classic storage generator plus nodes plus hypervisors all separated so you can have maybe more control. My next infrastructure will be the cloud. I'm already using hyperconvergence, but I want to stay updated. Go ahead with the answers, and we'll see what happens. And so, Robert, I won't ask you if you are evaluating HCI because you are already in here, and but it's interesting to note that the transition from virtual to hyperconvergence was easy. Even if you had to change hypervisor, you didn't notice that at the end, and the migration process was quick and without any additional pain. I mean, and that was very positive. So people are answering. A few more seconds, we got answer from everybody, and then we go with the new. So Greg, when customers call you because they are evaluating HCI, are you usually in competition with the other HCI vendors, or are you also in competition with traditional vendors? I mean, it's more a continued transition to HCI now, or it's more, people are still evaluating different options because maybe they want to understand better before going on toward this direction?
That's a great question. I mean, we actually see both, and we've got a lot of as customers are coming to us and looking for the next thing. Some of them have, or much like Robert, they invested in VMware from day one, right? They've had infrastructure for 5, even upwards 10, 15 years that is VMware based, and so they kind of have this in their mind, the sunk cost of, we understand how this environment works, but we're just trying to see if, whether it's for total cost of ownership or for the simplification of, the stack, can we make the switch to something else? And we still have customers that are coming from that environment, and that's all really that they're considering until they find us. But once they have found us, it's usually alongside other HCI solutions that they are considering, right? So they're looking at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, they're looking at Forrester research, they're looking at analysts that say, here are all the main HCI vendors out there. They're definitely talking with, if they're coming from VMware, they're talking to VMware about VMware options. And so we really see it kind of across the board, a little bit of everything.
It's interesting to see that. I'm sorry that we are not able again to share the result directly, but actually it's a split between the 3/3 answer. So it's my radar, but it's too early to tell. I'm strongly considering this option, and I prefer traditional solutions. So it's a kind maybe of what you're saying. So that there are several opinions still in the market about the HCI and how to approach your next infrastructure. So let's continue because we don't have a lot of time, but now we are in the next phase of an infrastructure. So what happens after day one? The day-to-day administration. So what happened in these 4 or 5 years, Robert? What did you find from your infrastructure, updates, and everything? I mean, the day-to-day activity that you had to do with your hyperconvergence infrastructures.
There's really not much to say here. There's very little day-to-day maintenance or whatever that you have to do. I'll get a notification if there's an available update. I'll say update, click, and the update happens. There's no day-to-day maintenance or anything that you have to do, or you don't have to check anything. If Scale notices something, maybe your storage space is running out, you'll get a notification advising you of that. But really, there's no day-to-day maintenance required. It's
So
simple.
you forgot to have an infrastructure.
Pretty well. Yeah, it really is night and day between a virtual environment and Scale. There's no comparison.
Yeah, so maybe this is due to the fact that the entire infrastructure is integrated. I mean, in the end, you buy a box and the box runs your virtual machines. You don't really care about each single component, and you give for granted that everything is integrated, it works.
Yeah, and that's the advantage or the benefit of having, we'll call it an appliance, is that for me as an end user, I don't have to worry about it.
Did you need to do any upgrade of the hardware or adding more nodes in these years?
Yes, I think we started off with 3 nodes, and we're up to 5 nodes at our main location, and we have 3 nodes at one of our remote locations, and we're able to replicate VMs back and forth for not backup, but for failover purposes, and that's about it for that. Yeah.
How was the expansion process?
Simple. Just like the initial setup, you add the new nodes and run a couple of commands, and then boom, it's in your, it'll show up in your console at that point. So as the administrator, there's very little that you have to administer. It's hard to explain to people that you don't have to do anything. If you're coming from a virtual environment, Hyper-V or VMware, where it's sort of an ongoing process to keep things running and checking things and fixing things that break or get disconnected, whatever. So it's all of that is taken away in Scale. And for me, where I'm essentially a one-person shop, in that I look after all the infrastructure, it's one more thing I don't have to look after.
Yeah, especially in small teams, having an autonomous infrastructure at the end of the day is very good. I mean, it's time that you can dedicate to other things.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it was easy. The expansion was easy. What happened when you started to do the replication? So you installed a second remote cluster, okay?
Yes.
And you had to start to replicate machines from site A to site B and vice versa, right?
Yes, and it's a simple process. It's a couple of mouse clicks, and the replication starts. You set a schedule how often you want it to replicate. In my case, I have servers replicating at nighttime when the other plants aren't busy, and at our site B, that was VMware there as well, and so those VMs are now in Scale, and I can set up a new server there and have it service our clients at all of our locations, and then replicate it back to site A. So it really doesn't matter where the server is located. It's just there, and it doesn't affect things one way or the other, where it lives.
Okay, very good. And so this, well, I'm pretty now worried about asking you about this, because you feel very, very happy with your infrastructure at the moment. So we already know that everything works pretty fine for you. but did you find something that didn't work?
Yeah, so I don't mind saying that I'm Scale's #1 fan, but the only sort of thing that was on my wish list years ago was the ability to increase the size of the drives on a VM. It was quite a process to do. Today, it's again a couple of mouse clicks to increase the size of one of your VM drives, and so that was really the only thing that I wish I was able to do, and we have that now. I think that's came in, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago or something. Craig would know, but yeah, it's everything just works, and I don't have anything that doesn't work. I don't have any criticisms or complaints about it.
Okay, Craig, sorry, I won't ask you about what works and what doesn't with Scale, because you know
He's biased.
and there is another things that I wanted to ask you before closing with questions, and it is about edge and hybrid cloud. I mean, you have this organization, so 4 different production plants and two sites already. So maybe you may be interested in the cloud for disaster recovery, or edge locations, so smaller sites where you can put a bunch of VMs. So what is your strategy around this? I know that you don't have this smaller site and the cloud yet.
No, we so we have Scale in 2 of our sites. We have another site in Newfoundland that potentially I could put a small system in, because we do have servers there, and right now they're having to, come back to here for to serve all their needs. And so I guess we have a private cloud. The culture here is to, try to avoid using the cloud, third-party systems. So I don't think we'll be looking at having Scale in the cloud, but I could see us having like an edge at one of our other plants, and that could be in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, we had the Tech Field Day 20 in San Francisco, and Scale presented a very, very nice solution. I mean, built out of very small devices with Wi-Fi, of course, Intel CPUs and everything, and a new, very innovative networking fabric that was able to build a very small 3-node cluster that is actually quite inexpensive. I don't know, Craig, if you want to talk a little bit about this, because I found it solution, the real hyper-converged edge kind of product. I mean, the price, I don't know if it was official, but the price was very low, and opening opening new use cases for hyperconversion. I mean, even a gas station could have something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's kind of interesting. As I said at the beginning, I've been here for 10 years, and we've primarily focused on small and medium-sized businesses this entire time. And what all those businesses have in common is, just like Robert, limited IT resources. Robert's got 2 people, now 3 on staff, managing 4 locations and a whole lot of VMs. Very similar to edge use cases where, in a typical, look at a grocery retailer, or as you mentioned, gas station, where there's zero IT infrastructure knowledge on site. You have to have a lot of automation. And so we were kind of drawn into this edge market based on the same principles that we put in place originally, going after small, medium-sized companies. And so now in edge, a lot of times it's hundreds, could be thousands of sites where they need something on site to run low latency on-premises workloads where the cloud is just not an option. And so for those workloads, we're coming out with smaller and smaller form factors that can kind of address what either would have been a single server or maybe a couple of servers and kind of compute power required to run those workloads there, whether they're VMs or container-based workloads. That's kind of the concept of that use case and why we feel like we're such a fit for it.
Fantastic. So let's close this webinar with another poll, and then we go straight with a question and answer. I don't know if we have still time. I will check with my team here, but actually, so what's your opinion on HCI after this panel? So what's your opinion on hyperconvergence after this panel? This panel was a little bit of an experiment for us. So we tried to, instead of giving you the classic slide deck, we try to have this conversation with a real end user. So to talk a little bit about a real use case, all the process, all the journey with the HCI. So it's the only way to think about on-premises infrastructure. Is HCI, as a HCI, its pros and cons. Do you still think that traditional infrastructure are more flexible? Does it make sense to have an integrated hybrid cloud strategy that includes, of course, HCI? And is your goal to have a cloud-only infrastructure in the future? So let's open the poll and see what happens. And I mean, I have my ideas. I put the last questions just a provocation. I know that practically nobody has the intent to have a cloud-only infrastructure, because we all live in a world that has so many different applications. Some of them are legacy applications, and migrating them to the cloud doesn't make sense. And like in the case of Robert, you want to keep your stuff close to your production plant. You don't want to have any issue with remote access to application and so on. And but we saw also during this presentation that the world is very varied, and people has different opinion on infrastructures. Let's see how many people already answered. Okay, we are close to the 60%. Very good. A few more seconds, and then we will go straight to okay, very good. Let's see what happened. So, well, again, we have nobody changed the. Well, actually, no. So we have 40% that thinks that it's the only way to think about on-premises infrastructures. 20% that thinks that HCI has its pros and cons, and 40% that says it makes sense in an integrated hybrid cloud strategy. And well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, especially the third one, and it's the way to go, in my opinion. And so we don't have a lot of time left. Unfortunately, we reached the top of the hour, but I'm sure that we will have time in the following days to answer to your questions via email, and we will split the question between me, Greg, and Robert, so you will receive the emails with our answers. Thank you very much for the time you dedicated to us today. And thank you, Robert, for your time, for the amazing story that you have with scale computing, and thank Greg for sponsoring this webinar and your point of view about HCI and scale computing. One more thing before closing this event, if you want to catch up on Twitter, you can find us on gigaom.com, or me personally on Signoretti on Twitter, and Scale Compute is at Scale Computing on Twitter. Robert, I don't know if you have a Twitter account, if you use it. Actually, I didn't ask before the start of this.
I'm afraid I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. And thank you again, everybody. Thank you to my guests. Bye-bye.